Welcome back to the BaptiCatholic Show.
Today we have a very special episode with a very special guest, and she's going to talk to us about what led her back into the arms of the Catholic Church.
Stay tuned.
All right, welcome back in, everybody, to the BaptiCatholic Show. I'm Casey, this is Aaron, and this is the show where we talk about the how and the what of Catholicism. Maybe in a different order than that, but whatever. We talk about it at some point. So anyway, today is exciting for a few reasons. Number one, this is our first interview.
With somebody that is not related to us.
Oh yeah, that's true. This is our first virtual.
You're the first real person we've interviewed. Everybody else we just guilted into.
Everybody else is like, okay, I'll do it if I have to. I was like, yeah, we need a fan base, and you get us to have somewhere to start, right? So anyway, this is our first interview with one of our good friends, Whitney Allen, and we've got an interesting kind of a topic today. We're going to go through a few things, right? We're going to talk about her own kind of a story as a cradle Catholic, her maybe reversion back to the Catholic faith and some of those steps along the way. So I'm excited to hear about this story and to get this off of kind of get this to take off. So Whitney, welcome to the BaptiCatholic Show.
Thanks, guys.
You're very welcome. I know this is probably a milestone for you.
Wait, and we didn't say this to begin with. Whitney also has her own podcast that everybody should check out too. We'll put it down in the show notes and everything.
There's a whole part of today's interview that is plugging it, okay? So don't even worry, Aaron. I've got this figured out. Okay. So we just want to know, straight out the bat, who are you?
Who are you anyway?
Tell us.
Who are you anyway?
Who are you anyway? Who are you anyway?
I saw that in your notes. I was like, I don't know how to answer that question.
You have to. I'm super interesting. Okay?
Yeah.
I was trying to be really clever and come up with something like, I don't know, Casey, you just approached me at the grocery store.
We're desperate. We're desperate for that.
Gosh, well, I don't know. So let's see, the kind of a high overview. Whitney Allen. I grew up in Pennsylvania and moved down to Lexington in 98. Been here ever since. But, I think in context of what we're talking about, I was a cradle Catholic, went to Catholic school for 12 years. And then after high school, kind of fell away from the church. And all of that's intertwined with some of these other things that I know we're going to get into. So, but just, who am I? I don't even know. Child of God.
So listen, our story, which everybody is tired of hearing, is as former Protestants. She grew up non-denominational. I was Baptist. We both ended up Baptist before coming to the Catholic Church, basically. And so we're entrenched in good old Kentucky Bible Belt Christianity. Catholicism is like on the fringe. Pennsylvania probably wasn't quite like that. I'm curious what it was like as a cradle Catholic in PA.
Yeah, I honestly, and it's not true. There's of course other denominations in the Northeast, but growing up where I grew up, like for a long time, I didn't really even know that there was anything other than being Catholic or Jewish. Like that was kind of the, I'd see these other denominations, Presbyterians and it didn't even register to me that people weren't Catholic. And then when I moved down here, it was like, oh, we're the minority. But yeah, it was very, very kind of, I don't want to say culturally Catholic, it certainly wasn't like what you find in Europe. But the Northeast is definitely more prominently Catholic. So it was and going to Catholic school for 12 years, it was just part of my daily life, and kind of all my friends were Catholic, and that didn't change until I relocated to Kentucky.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So in that journey then, when did you stop going to the Catholic Church? Before you moved here or after?
Yeah. It was, I was in Catholic school through 12th grade. So, kind of there was some element of it that wasn't my choice as far as going to Mass. But I think it was around 16 when I really started to pull away from the faith and started to have doubts and questions. And that's a tough age to try to figure those things out on your own. But a lot of it stemmed from my mom was very involved with the church, and she was in the choir, and she actually played the xylophone, which I love telling people because who plays the xylophone? So, so we went frequently because she was doing that. And I started to get to an age where I realized she wasn't receiving communion. And to get to an age where I realized that was different, and I understood the sacrament and, the importance of it. And I didn't really understand why my mom never went. And for a long time, I think I thought, maybe she was in the choir, so she went up differently than we did. And then I came to realize that it was because her and my father had never had an annulment, and she had remarried outside of the faith. And in my teenage brain, that translated to the church was punishing my mother. And if they were going to punish her, then I wasn't going to receive communion either. Until they let her receive communion, I wasn't going to do it. And we I kind of took this, petulant stance. And that just really kind of opened the door and let me spiral away from my faith. And, and then college, and certainly was not tied to my faith during college. And, all these things kind of pulled me further and further away. I never didn't identify as a Catholic. Like in my heart, I was always Catholic. And I always was tethered to God, but he was by no means my center.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah.
That's which I knew some of this background anyway, but I'm curious about like where that left your mom in the midst of it. Was she like, no, like, how did she feel when you were like, I'm doing this because I don't think that's fair? Was she like, yeah, it's not fair, or was she like, I don't think you quite maybe get where it's coming from, that kind of thing?
Probably a little both. My mom, and neither of my parents, and even my grandparents, who are all Catholic, they always wanted us to be a part of the faith. They wanted us to have a regular practice, but it was never forced.
Mm-hmm.
They led by example, but they also never, drug us back kicking and screaming.
Mm-hmm.
I think my mom at the time was, I think it hurt her that we were doing that, because she understood what it meant to, deny yourself the sacraments. But I think she was also really hurt as well by that whole process. So I think, knowing her and just kind of some recollection that I have of that time, it was, I think she certainly, I think on one hand, it was probably more like, she appreciated that her children were loving her and standing at her side. But at the same time, I'm sure it hurt her that's when she started to see us pull away.
Yeah.
So I guess that kind of, so you're kind of, you're tethered to God, but you went through that, and of course, into college. Did that extend to when you were married? So how did that play out? Did you marry a Catholic, or?
I actually did marry a Catholic, but we did not get married in the Catholic Church. At the time that we got married, neither one of us were practicing. We were, kind of, as each year went by, I sort of pulled further and further away from the faith. And I actually had this discussion a little bit not too long ago with a women's group, and they were talking about how that, how important it is to find a spouse with similar faith, and they kind of assumed that that was my my story, and I was like, well, yes, but when we got married in the first 10 years of our marriage, I was not a practicing Catholic, and so I'm the one that changed the rules. I changed the narrative for him. But no, it was our it was our infertility, our miscarriage, that Kevin's not a practicing Catholic, but he supports me. But that led me back to the church. It was that 10-year journey of, trying to build a family and not being able to, that ultimately brought me back.
See, that's interesting to me. And I've, of course, we've heard this story before, and we will plug your podcast where you talk more about this topic. But on the face of it, when somebody hears that a trial, like something negative seemingly, brought you back into the Catholic Church. In fact, it's interesting, the kind of the full circle, right? Something that was hurtful, right? And that was perceived, right? The church punishing your mother. And then how in the world did going through this trial of infertility bring you back to this church that you thought was, punishing your mother? That's an interesting circle.
Yeah.
Talk about that, Whitney. Like, I know that the infertility got you to consider it, but I've never heard like why. Like, was it I feel lost, so I need something, or
were there people in the church that reached out? Those kind of things.
Yeah, no, to your question, Casey, but I don't know if I put myself in a position to be reached out to.
Mm-hmm.
It was, 10 years of straight infertility. Well, I had one miscarriage, and that, I think that was kind of about halfway into my tenure. And I say 10 years because at the end of those 10 years, that's when we, stopped actively trying and pursuing treatments and things. So, halfway through those 10 years, I had a miscarriage. And I think that, really, it was the beginning of me turning back to the church. Because in that moment, there was no denying that, that was a life. And it really changed my mindset about a lot of things. And I started to turn back to the church, and not even the church, just prayer. I started going back to God more and more and more. But my prayer was really I was just begging and bargaining. I wasn't praying. I still wasn't bringing him, God back into my life in a meaningful way. I was bringing him back into my life. And when I wasn't getting what I wanted, when I wanted it, I kind of shoved him away again. But it opened that door for me to start, we were always very big on novenas when we were growing up. And so I started to return to novenas, and I started to seek out the saints. And there was some other things going on too. I wasn't just, I don't know. It wasn't like, I wasn't all in, I was kind of dipping my toe and saying like, hey, St. Jude, I did this for 9 days. Why don't I have a baby? Oh, that one didn't work. Let me try this one.
Mm-hmm.
And, to answer your question, Aaron, I think it was through those 10 years, I had gotten increasingly angry and depressed and sad and envious. And I had, all of this, they talk about the God-shaped hole, and I was filling mine with those things. I was filling mine with anger and envy and sadness and doubt. That's not sustainable, but that just brought me to a place in my, I don't think it was one moment, but it brought me to a place where I couldn't live my life like that anymore. And I didn't want to live my life like that anymore. And I didn't know how not to, other than going back to church. And it was like this tug. And then I finally went to the cathedral and learned about the Catholics Returning Home program.
Okay.
Did you just see it in the bulletin?
Actually, they had like a 20-foot banner in the middle of the front yard of the cathedral.
Nice. Money well spent.
Right.
Money well spent. About evangelization for sure. Oh man. So that's where I kind of wanted to push this. So you had kind of these inklings, which props to your family, right? Props to your mom for bringing you to mass. And even though, there's this, maybe false understanding the church was punishing your mom, but you still were in Catholic school. You had that anchor there to get pulled back.
Yeah. Well, and it's like you said, they taught by example. And obviously that's the case. If that was like, you were like, yeah, we did novenas, and that's what you turned to. And you just kept feeling like, man, like, go with his mom.
Isn't that a word of hope though, too, to a lot of people who are struggling with their children being outside of the faith, who think it's, what did I do wrong? And I'm not even talking about people who just neglect it. I'm talking about people who are actively bring up their kids, and they still something goes, awry. It's like, there's hope. right?
Yeah.
That you planted seeds there that the Lord can work in their hearts and bring them back. So that's really cool. So you got connected with Catholics Returning Home. So is that like kind of the launch point that pulls you into the church proper? So you had that kind of, you were getting tethered back to God in prayer. Was that the leap forward kind of?
I think so. It was definitely, it was definitely the gateway, and it was terrifying. I went, and I don't know if I was more afraid of being the only person there or, one of 50.
Yeah.
And as always, it's those series, it's what it needs to be. But it was me and about 12 other people that were just so different. And just sitting there for those 6 weeks, I honestly didn't participate that much because I was in a place where I was so wounded, like I almost couldn't speak. I couldn't tell my story because I physically couldn't tell it because I couldn't get the words out, like it hurt too much. And so I didn't really participate that much, but I listened, and I listened to other people's stories. And it just, all of a sudden, it allowed me to see the faith through adult eyes and not teenager eyes. And I was kind of like, I was like, I don't think I knew half this stuff, or maybe I knew it and I don't remember it, or, I was too young to grasp it. And it just ignited this like hunger for me to learn more. And I just kind of started devouring everything I could to relearn the faith. And making that was, I remember it may have been the last session of my Catholics Returning Home series, the one that I went through. I think it ended on Ash Wednesday. And so it took me right into Lent, which I hadn't observed in a long time. And I made the commitment, which was just kind of like wild for me, that I was going to go to Mass every single day for Lent. So I went from 20 some odd years of not going to Mass to every single day.
You had a bunch to make up for, right?
Yeah. And it was every single time. I think I cried through the first 30 Masses. Like, I wasn't, I would just be moved to tears. And it reignited the sacraments for me. Like every time I had that release. And then before, kind of backing up a little bit, part of Catholics Returning Home, you're encouraged to go to confession. And it was a 22-year confession.
Yeah.
2 parts. Technically it was 3. And it was a really, one, it was beautiful and cleansing and grace-filled as confession is, but it also, I confessed the anger, and I confessed the envy, and I confessed the despair. And it was a weird thing because I didn't feel like I was sinning. I didn't feel like what I was doing was wrong. I was just having these feelings. But I realized, I was reflecting for confession that I was using those emotions to not only hurt myself, but to hurt others, and to put a wedge between myself and God. And so it was wrong, Yeah. So once I surrendered to that, it just, then it just kind of snowballed. Like I made a commitment to just involve myself as much as I could in the parish and to start to build a community. And so that was, did I answer your question? I don't remember what the question was.
Yeah, you did. And what was interesting is when you were talking, and you used the word gateway. So it's like, you heard it here, folks, in the BaptiCatholic podcast. Catholics Returning Home, a gateway drug to hard Catholicism.
Gateway drug.
Okay. So, but when you were talking about that, I was like, yes, and I felt the parallel with Catholics Returning Home to like an RCIA or something
Absolutely.
like that.
Yep.
And we talk about a lot in evangelization, finding or creating, if there are not any, shallow ends of the pool, right, or gateways, right, where people feel in an atmosphere that's not threatening, right, that's not judgmental. Like, why aren't you Catholic or a practicing Catholic, you idiot? You should be at this point. To be able to have that. I didn't know all this. Where's all this coming from? And
Mhm.
we had from one end of the spectrum and she had from the other. That's pretty powerful. What were you going to say?
How long ago was that, Whitney? Because I see you now, and
She's
your
like
name
mega
is on the bulletin like 15 times.
Listen,
Please contact.
it should just say, the cathedrals and then by Whitney Allen, all the programming.
Goodness, no. How long ago was that? That was in 2015.
2015. Okay, cool. So
6 years.
oh, cool. So we came in 2014 and then she
Yeah.
came back. That's neat. Well, very good. So I'm curious now. So now you've drank the Kool-Aid or whatever. You're a Catholic. Okay? So what about? I know you've mentioned this in your podcast, the Forward Healing Project, that the Seven Sorrows.
Yeah.
So what is that, and how did that tie into all this?
So the Seven Sorrows, it's the Seven Sorrows of Mary, and it starts with the prophecy of Simeon and ends at Jesus's burial. And I was introduced to the Seven Sorrows in 2018. I was on a silent retreat, which is an annual practice that I have. And I go, the retreats that I do are directed. So I have a spiritual director that you're assigned to for an hour a day. And so that particular retreat, the woman who was my spiritual director introduced me to this book called Your Sorrow is My Sorrow. And it walks you through each of Mary's sorrows and how they're relatable to your own personal life or, modern life. And it was, I was a pretty solid path to healing at that point, but it really took that healing to an entirely new level when I was able to tie my grief, my pain, my things I didn't understand, the suffering that I was still processing with her, and to directly tie that into the Blessed Mother was, really overwhelming. I think we forget, I think we have this thought that if we're, doing good and praying and have this relationship with God and Jesus, that we don't suffer. We're not supposed to suffer. And we forget, that she did. She was not spared suffering. But through that suffering, God used her, and that's what he does with us. And it gave my grief some validation, and it let me move to a place where I could believe that God was going to do something good with what happened, that our own struggles. And so that's, I don't know if I answered the Seven Sorrows, but that's the Seven Sorrows goes through her, through them fleeing into Egypt, and then also, losing him in the temple, meeting him on the way to the cross, his crucifixion, death, and burial. And there's a rosary called the Seven Sorrows Rosary, which I love, and you meditate through the different sorrows with 7 sets of 7 Hail Marys and different reflections. And it starts with an act of contrition, which I actually absolutely love. I think it's a really beautiful thing. But yeah, that's been a devotion of mine since I learned about it, and I try to teach other people about it too. So,
that would be, that'd be great, Whitney. But I just don't know how to pray the Seven Sorrows mystery or the Rosary. So where would I go to learn?
This is a shameless plug because I do have. Funny you should mention that, Casey. No, I did an episode on that I released on Holy Saturday this year on praying the Seven Sorrows Rosary with our friend Meg. But I used the version found on churchpop.com. You can find different versions of it. The 7 sets of 7 don't change. The meditations don't change. It's more of your opening prayer and some of the additional prayers that are included in it. But yes, so that's on the Forward Healing Project podcast as well.
So, Whitney, talk about, because the book you mentioned, My Sorrow is Your Sorrow, right?
Can I hold it up?
Yes.
Or your sorrow is my sorrow.
Sorry. Your sorrow is my sorrow. So that's the book that you use with Healing Hopeful Hearts, right?
It's one of them,
Okay.
yeah.
So will you talk about what brought you to starting Healing Hopeful Hearts and how that came to then go to Forward Healing Project?
Yeah. So I was, back at the church, and I remember, well, a couple things happened. I'm not sure the timelines. The timing is a little bit blurry, but they all happened at around the same time. I attended the Light of the World retreat, and the following retreat, which was just a few months later, I was asked to speak. And so, I told my story, and at the end of that, I was approached by Katie Shepherd and asked if I would consider starting some type of support group in the parish. And so I kind of, tucked it away. And at some point, this is where I don't remember if the bulletin happened first or if Katie happened first, but I remember flipping through the bulletin and I saw all of these things for people. It was Catholics who've had abortions, Catholics who are divorced, Catholics who are widowed, married Catholics, young Catholics, and I wasn't there. So I'm sitting alone in a pew, and like I was okay with that. I understood, my husband I wasn't going to force him. But I was alone. I didn't know that many people. I was, and I kind of hated like the sign of peace because I'm just like, oh, as soon as you got hugging, give me a shout out. It's like always a little awkward. And it just felt like very isolating in a way because I was like, I'm here alone and I'm not here. I'm not represented here, and so and then Katie's invitation, it just kind of started the desire to develop something. And I didn't want a traditional support group. I think the support, I kind of call it a support series, because I think an ongoing, never ending support group can actually be a dangerous thing if you're not managing, your own grief properly. But anyway, I wanted it to look different. And I wanted it to be inclusive. I didn't want anybody to be separated. I didn't want men to feel like they couldn't go. I didn't want a 60-year-old woman who never got to process her miscarriage feel like she couldn't come. And so we worked on creating what that series would look like. And it's ebbed and flowed over the last couple of years. But that's kind of how Healing Hopeful Hearts started, was just this, I was on a path to healing and I wanted to help other people. And I didn't see me, in there. I didn't see where somebody like me could go.
I think that's so cool because, well, on a lot of different levels, but so props to you. But a lot of times, we've had at least one person in this past year as we're doing this podcast reach out and say, how do I make my parish, how do I make my parish more alive? Or how do I want my kids to grow up and be Catholic and,
be excited about
and I just don't see that community in the churches near me. Or, one answer is you do it.
Yeah.
Like,
it's
right. And you've got the support. Yeah. If you've got the support from, of course, your pastor and others in the church, just
right.
go after it. Yeah, I think that's a good thing.
And Whitney, that's like totally her personality to be like, all right, I'll just do this. And that's how it's going to go. Yeah.
So I just wanted to, because we're getting towards the end here, I wanted to just ask you to, and I didn't put this here, kind of, sort of, I put general tips, ? We really just, but I'm curious, like if somebody's watching this or listening to this, one of those three people, and they're dealing with suffering, or seriously, on a serious note, they're dealing with suffering, or there's something to keep them from the church, or there's a seeming obstacle there, whether that's infertility or something else. Like, why bother getting plugged back into the church, or what would you just say to somebody like that?
I think the grieving process, we forget that in order to move, we have to grieve. you have to grieve well. And nobody gets to tell you how long that takes or how to do it. And everyone's going to do it differently. But at some point, in order to move past that pain, you have to surrender. And that surrender, I think comes when you're not giving up, you're surrendering. And when you surrender to God and say, this isn't how I thought things were going to turn out, but I trust you, and I trust you're going to use this for good. I think that takes you to a place of healing and allows God to work in your life to bring good and to open your heart so you can see that good and you can start to move beyond the grief. It doesn't ever go away. But to answer your question, Casey, as far as coming back, using the church or coming back into it, from a place of grief, it was a process. It was several years of surrendering, taking back. It was like, I'm going to give this to you, but then I'm going to take it back because you're taking too longer. But yeah, so general tips, it's start to lean into that, what that surrender looks like, but also be willing to actually grieve. I think we're afraid to grieve. I think sometimes people think it makes them weak or, people aren't going to understand it. And, your grief's not for anyone other than you. And, it's given to you so that you can find the consolation on the other side.
Mm. Well, that's great. And to realize too, the Lord is patient and he loves us, right? Mm-hmm. He loves us. He's not just, I'm a zap you, but he's a loving God, and he's patient with us. And I mean, if you crack open the Bible and just do put your finger down, you see a people who are doing that dance of back and forth, and whether it's disobedience or whatever it is, and he's patient and he loves us.
Yeah. I think my favorite part of your story, Whitney, though, is that there's so many people that they get in a spot of difficulty or pain or whatever, and that's what causes them to leave. They feel like I've done my part. I was here at church. I've done all this stuff, and where's mine? You know what I mean? And I love that you realize no, I need this. It went the other way, and man, I hope that that's the case for others that leave too. When troubles come, goodness, it's much more difficult to deal with without God than with that. Yeah.
It is. And I think, I've been reflecting on this actually a lot lately about, think about people in the Bible, like you said, Casey, they suffered.
Mm-hmm.
Mary suffered, Jesus suffered, Abraham suffered. They were not spared suffering, but because of their faith and because, of that fortitude, they were sustained through God's love. And, and I think if we can be reminded of that, none of us are going to be spared. We're born wounded. We're all going to grieve at some point and struggle and suffer. And it's not because he doesn't love us. It's not because the church did something wrong. It's going to happen to every one of us, but we're only whole and sustained when we return or open up our hearts back to God and have that faith in where the church is going to take us.
Amen. Yeah. Amen. All right. Well, this has been awesome.
Yeah.
You might want to, change your identity or something. It's about
I'll get ready.
It's not going to be because of us. It's going to be because of you. So thank you for being on the BaptiCatholic with us to chat about this. Just really important stuff, because I think a lot of people, especially now, there's all kinds of different shades and varieties of suffering that's going on right now, grief. And so realizing that there's always hope and that the Lord loves us. Yeah. He really does. And so anyway, until next time, everybody, we'll see you back here on BaptiCatholic Show.